Radical KM, time for a change. Sam woke up. It was dark and cold. It was the middle of the night after all. She had to get to the TV station to be interviewed on breakfast television. She needed more coffee, but there wasn't enough coffee at 3 a.m. She got to the TV studio and some chipper morning person led her to her dressing room so that her hair and makeup could be done before the broadcast. She wasn't sure what she was going to say. The questions that the interviewer had submitted for pre-approval were straightforward enough, but these journalists sometimes like to sneak something in live and see how you responded. Sam was live on the air before she knew what hit her. She was in the studio under the hot lights, being counted down in 3, 2, 1. The next 10 minutes were a bit of a blur. She wasn't sure what happened until she watched the video replay of it later. She thought all in all it went pretty well. The interviewer introduced her as the CEO of Widget Inc. and gave the pre-approved bio and talking points that her team had supplied. And then the questions all seemed to have come at the same time. How had they achieved 6 times higher revenue growth than the competition and improved employee engagement and productivity at the same time? What about the improvements in decision-making that had increased sustainable and creative leadership attributes and which had positively impacted their operations as well as their stock performance? They had been able to innovate and find some solutions to intractable problems for the technology that their company made. How had they done all these things in such a short period of time and all during a global pandemic? The interviewer had also commented that profits were down even before the pandemic and that the pandemic just made it worse. The interviewer wanted to know how she had turned the company around from this state of affairs. And so Sam explained that she had talked with her senior management team and told them that they needed to do things differently, that the world had and was changing faster than anything any of them had ever experienced before. She asked for ideas. Nothing was too crazy or outside the box. If it entered their heads, she wanted to hear it. No judgments, no criticisms, just curiosity and open-mindedness. The accountants and MBAs in the room had suggested logical, analytical ideas the board of directors and shareholders would have liked, and yet it was the same old thinking. It wasn't going to solve any of their problems. And then the chief knowledge officer offered up a suggestion. Her suggestion seemed counterintuitive and was different than any of the other suggestions. She suggested Radical KM. Radical KM is about including creativity and arts-based interventions in the other KM activities that they were already doing. The CKO shared some articles she'd found explaining the benefits of creativity for innovation and growth, as well as for sustainable leadership and personal development. It sounded like a win for everyone. And, most importantly, it sounded like some different thinking that might just be the way forward. Sam knew that data wasn't really the be-all and end-all that many people thought. She knew that you could make the numbers say whatever you wanted them to. And she knew she needed to do something that was going to address the culture of the organization and knowledge sharing now that they were working from home with the occasional trip to the office. She knew she needed to do something to help her staff deal with the constant change. The team talked about it. They knew they needed to do something differently, and focusing on efficiency and effectiveness just wasn't getting them anywhere. Doing the same old things wasn't going to change anything. It was just going to make things worse. The world had changed, and Widget Inc. needed to change with it. The CKO came back the next day with a plan to start piloting and rolling out Radical KM across the organization. She started small and grew the activities that would help develop people's creativity. After all, this kind of change initiative takes time and patience, a lot of communication, and it's better to iterate and learn as you go and generate success stories to share and gain more buy-in rather than take a boil the ocean approach and try and do everything all at once. That's what had made the CKO successful with other parts of the KM strategy. Introducing creativity and arts-based interventions in the form of icebreakers had helped address cultural issues and improved people's resilience and mental health as they adjusted to working from home. It helped people make connections even though they weren't in the same room. Sam shared the example of the marketing team member who had been struggling with a branding issue and who'd had a sudden flash of insight after doing a scribble drawing icebreaker. He'd solved a problem that he'd been staring at for months with a simple scribble. Sam also shared the story of a financial analyst who had lost his mother to COVID 4 months earlier and who hadn't had a moment of peace since that time, but he had experienced a few moments of calmness in the middle of a 3-minute guided visualization that the finance team had started a meeting with. It had been such a relief to him to know that peace and calmness were attainable while he mourned the loss of his mother. And then, when they'd started being in the office part-time, how they'd changed some of the office space and created studios so that when people were in the office, they could collaborate and generate ideas and do things that weren't so easy to do virtually together in one space. It really made a difference to the culture and knowledge sharing that was happening, not to mention the ideas and innovations that they came up with. Sam had told the interviewer all of these things, and she told the interviewer how traditional KM was like a wired network that kept people connected to their desks, whereas radical KM was like Wi-Fi that allowed people to work from wherever they wanted. Creativity gave them different perspectives and helped them make new connections. Radical KM is what had helped them. Radical KM is what had given them the insights to solve the seemingly intractable problems they were facing. Radical KM was the best decision the management team had ever made. That's what led to the higher revenue growth and the increased employee engagement and the improvements in operational performance and stock performance and, of course, innovation. That's the story Sam told because that's what made a difference. Sam was glad that she told that story, even though it probably wasn't what anyone was expecting. She recognized that implementing Radical KM is what more organizations need to do. Space for creativity and learning from artists is really what's needed if organizations are going to embrace a more humane, sustainable way forward. The times have changed. Knowledge management has changed. Radical KM is the way to a better future. Sam hopes you'll join her with your own Radical KM program. Thank you.